Concluding Theo Usher's report. Joining me in the Westminster studio, Education Secretary Gavin Williamson. Thank you for coming in. Good to finally actually meet you in the flesh.
I know, we've spoken so many times.
We've waved at each other down the line, as it's called.
We're socially distanced.
We are.
Very sensible
And
way.
I trust you and your family well, so best wishes to them. Knowing what we hear now in Theo's report and what will be in place in September, Secretary of State, were you understandably a bit ambitious with your initial June deadline trying to get children back behind their desks?
So I think every one of us want to deliver the very best for every child. As parents ourselves, we know how vital actually being in school is, and so getting them into school at the earliest possible opportunity is what we're always driving for. If it was a little bit ambitious, I would hold my hands up to that. But I want to see, and what we will see in September, is that every school, every child and every lesson will be running, and sort of children will be able to go into schools, they're able to have the benefit of a world-class education that we actually provide. We've got almost 1.5 million children going back into school at the end of last week. I want to see that number grow and grow every single week as we go to the summer holidays. But in September, every child has to be back.
There, as our poll showed, parents are understandably concerned. Are you hopeful that a summer holiday, once everybody hopefully calms down, the disease is pretty much contained, if they can afford it, not everyone can, they might have some time away, go and sit on a beach. Come September, they will think, right, new school year, new dawn, let's get our sons and daughters back in, because if they don't, will they face fines?
So we will make sure that we're in a position of creating schools as secure and safe places for not just children to go to, but also people to teach in and to work in. So that's our number one priority. But I had the privilege of seeing my eldest daughter go back to school, a year 10. And when they come back, you see the pleasure that they've had from learning from slightly more qualified people than myself in terms of teaching them science or maths or English. You see the pleasure of being with their friends again. You see, actually, it's about learning, but it's all the other things that schools bring. We've always been taking a cautious approach, but what we are absolutely adamant is that school is the best place for a child to be, and it is going to be compulsory for children to return back to school unless there is a very good reason,
or a local spike, obviously, if there was
or a local spike where there'd have to be local lockdowns. But we do have to get back into compulsory education, and as part of that, obviously, fines sit alongside that.
So there would be, unless there was a local spike or grandma was ill or whatever.
Unless there is a good reason for the absence, unless there's a good reason for the absence, then we'd be looking at the fact that we would be imposing fines on families if they're not sending their children back.
You briefly had a word with me upon your arrival when the news bulletin was playing. There seems to be two figures, and I know you're the man to solve this for us. One newspaper talks about £1 billion for schools. Another newspaper talks about £1.5 billion. You've explained it to me. Detail to the listeners where the money's actually going.
Well, naturally, Nick, this will shock you that government minister says it's the higher figure.
Of course.
It's £1 billion for rebuilding schools. There'll be 50 schools that we're going to be highlighting in the autumn of this year, and you're going to be seeing shovels in the ground next year, probably from September. This will be great for the children, great for the schools, but also great for the construction industry as well. And then there's an extra £560 million that's going to go on for condition improvement. So it's about roofs and replacements and smaller works that will be going on in terms of a school. But this is great because actually this is on top of £1.4 billion that's already going to schools. It gives schools a lot more ability to make the changes that they want to see happen.
How will the schools be selected, Secretary of State?
For the 50, it's going to be based on the greatest need. The schools that we know.
So do they present to you and your colleagues?
Yeah. So
each area.
We've got a lot of information on condition of schools right across the country. It's done on the basis.
Will it be a fair geographical? This is just England, presumably.
It is just England.
Is this a fair geographical spread of England, or will more be in the north, red wall areas, perhaps?
It will be done on the condition, and what we'll be doing is looking at the basic need that schools have, because we all know that children learn better in a great environment. And since we came into power, we've seen a big reduction in the cost of rebuilding new schools, really driven down the cost, going to continue to do that. And you'll see in the spending review a 10-year rebuilding plan for schools. This is really important for the construction industry and the economy, gives them certainty, gives them confidence to invest in their future. We can be looking at modern methods of construction, training young people with the skills that they need in these new methods of construction, driving down the price and getting better schools to boot.
As we're talking, some listeners are emailing, texting. If their child is in a class of, let's say, 30, and we're going to look at smaller... God can't make more land. Are you going to provide porter cabins? Or, I mean, where will these children go? How are you going to make a class of 30 safe?
Well, we're working very closely with Public Health England, and we've created a hierarchy of controls. And what we've seen bubbles of classroom bubbles of 15, and we'd look at growing that to the full class size. But what we
so will it be full class size in September? It will.
It will be full class size in September. But as part of that, Nick, we've still got to make sure that the potential vectors of transmission, we look at how we constantly reduce that, making sure that we've got good hygiene, a strong cleaning regime. These are the things that will stop the virus spreading. But we'll be sharing the full set of thinking as to how we're going to do this, making sure schools remain safe and actually children benefit from a world-class education.
There's been a change at the top of the civil service, just moving a little bit out of the education brief. Sir Mark Sedwill. How much will the government miss him?
I'd say that's quite a big sort of shift out of the education lane, a wonderful segue. Yeah, very much. I mean, you saw in the exchange.
How did you get on with him,
you saw in the exchange of letters.
Would you describe as a cordial friendship you had with Sir Mark?
We have a very good working relationship, and you saw in terms of the Prime Minister's remarks in his letters to Sir Mark the value that the Prime Minister really does put on the efforts and the work of that he's made, not just in the role as Cabinet Secretary, but as National Security Advisor and 30 years within the Civil Service.
And how would you characterise your relationship with him?
Cordial, good working relationship.
OK. One other thing we're looking at, as of course Sir Mark Sedwill goes, one of the jobs that he's taking, and you sit at Cabinet so you'll know about this, is that David Frost will move in to be the National Security Advisor. He's more of a, if you will, hard line as regard Brexit. What does that mean as to how the United Kingdom is positioning itself? There's another deadline, of course, tomorrow, and then we look to the end of the year.
Well Nick, I think when Britain made the decision to leave the European Union, the people who voted for Brexit weren't voting... there wasn't a vote to turn our back on the world. It was actually a vote for Britain to play a much bigger role in the world and actually be a bigger voice in the world. And I think David Frost in this role, this is a man that's got immense experience. He was in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office for 30 years or more. I think he'll bring a real enthusiasm, a real passion for making sure that Britain has a prominent role on the world stage and that we're really punching our weight. And the world needs Britain to be doing that. The world needs Britain to be showing global leadership, because when we do, the world's quite simply a better place.
Just coming back to schools, one of your predecessors, albeit under a Labour administration, Lord Blunkett, talked at this group of particularly primary school children, it could be a catastrophic dent in their life chances, the number of weeks or months they've missed at school. Yeah. Is he right, Secretary of State?
Well, this is why we've secured an extra £1 billion actually to support children. And I think some of the children that David was referencing, some of those children from the most disadvantaged backgrounds who probably haven't had the same level of support that many other children have had. And this is why we've come up with a really targeted package of making sure that there's individual tutoring, individual help to make sure that they catch up on what they've lost. The best place for children in order to be able to succeed in their future in life is in school. That's why every school's going to be open, every child can go back and they'll be receiving every lesson. We're going to deliver that.
And as we conclude this interview, let's come back where we started, and you and your colleagues trying to get the children back, and possibly it was a bit ambitious. Was it also blocked by trades unions in some way, particularly when one instructed not to engage in any way with the government? What's your reaction to her union's position?
I think, my wife's a teaching assistant, my brother's a teacher. I see across the board the massive amount of commitment that we see in the teaching profession to get classrooms open and get children back into it, because they know the difference they're making to people's lives. I will work with everyone in order to make sure every child is back in school in September.
But were they working with you and your colleagues? Could they have been more helpful?
There are many trade unionists who've done amazing things in order to make sure that we are working towards the full opening of every school. There's so many people who've done so much to get, almost 1.5 million children back into the classroom. I hope that everyone takes that approach and takes that attitude.
Could they have done more?
We can always do more.
Okay. Lastly, your wife's a teaching assistant.
She is.
So she's not a hairdresser, because there's no way that is 12, 13, 14 weeks of hair. Someone has been cutting. So if it's not your wife.
So this is a dreadful confession. So early on in the pandemic, I went onto the Argos website and bought myself a pair of clippers, and I've been doing a grade 8 short back and sides. That's why it's all ragged around the edge.
Right.
Now, Nick, for £8.50, I'm quite willing to bring them into the studio and give you a short back and sides if you want, but I want payment for it. Is that going to be...
when you're allowed to, we'll do that. And then I will give £100 of whatever your haircut. I will give £100 to a charity of your choosing. If you choose to give me a haircut,
that would be fantastic. God, I know barbers are a lot cheaper up in Wolverhampton. If you pay £100, that's very generous of you.
But I have to say, Mr. Williamson, if that's quotes a dreadful confession, you're not getting out enough. Because if that's a dreadful confession, you need to do a lot more. Gavin Williamson, thank you for coming by the Westminster studio. The 9:15 LBC News headline.